"Hello, I'm glad you're here. Are you comfortable where you are right now? If you are, then let's begin our quiet walk into the distant world of ancient Sparta, a place where life was harsh, simple, and shaped by discipline from the very first breath. Let the sounds of the modern world fade a little as we settle into the calm rhythm of the past. Long ago, in the southern part of Greece, there was a land of rolling hills, dry riverbeds, and fields that needed careful tending. In that land stood the city-state of Sparta. It was not like other Greek cities. There were no grand marketplaces filled with merchants calling out their prices. There were no high, busy seas filled with trading ships. Sparta was quieter, more guarded, and shaped by a way of life that had grown from fear, hardship, and the constant pressure to survive. A Spartan child entered this world with little softness. When a baby was born, elders inspected the child to see if it looked strong enough to someday serve the city. It was a practice that seems cruel now, but to the Spartans it was a necessary duty. They believed that the strength of the city came before the comfort of any single person. And so, a family that welcomed a newborn had only a moment of joy before they felt that familiar tension, waiting to hear if the child would be allowed to live and grow. For the children who remained, life moved quickly. Parents loved their children, but affection was rarely shown. Fathers often spoke with calm, controlled voices. Mothers trained their sons and daughters to be tough. They believed that softness invited danger. Spartan mothers were known for saying that their sons should return from war either carrying their shields or being carried upon them. It was not a statement of coldness, but of duty. To them, duty was the highest form of love. Each day was shaped by simple routines. The smell of coarse bread, the sight of wool garments hanging in the dry air, the clatter of bronze weapons being repaired by craftsmen who worked slowly, wiping sweat from their foreheads as they hammered. Many Spartan homes were plain, with wooden beams that creaked when the wind blew through the valley. Yet even in such homes, children learned that every object had a purpose, and nothing should be wasted. By the age of 7, boys left their homes to enter the agoge, the state-run training system. Their first nights were always the hardest. A boy might lie awake on a simple bed made from reeds he had been told to gather himself. The dark hall around him would be filled with the breathing of other boys, all trying to be silent, all trying not to tremble. Outside, the night insects sang, and the cold settled over the valley. Many boys cried quietly at first, missing their mothers, missing the warmth of home. But they learned to hide their tears, for older boys watched them, and any show of weakness brought punishment. Their training was strict. They walked barefoot even when the ground was rough. Their tunics were thin even when the nights were cold. They received only small amounts of food, and were encouraged to steal more, not for mischief, but to learn skill and cunning. If they were caught, they were punished not for stealing, but for failing. Hunger became a constant companion. It gnawed at their stomachs and sharpened their minds. The boys learned to move softly, to listen closely, and to work as a unit. Life for girls was different but still demanding. Spartan girls did not enter the agoge, but they trained in their own way. They exercised outdoors, ran races, and practiced throwing javelins. Their bodies were expected to be strong so that they could give birth to strong children. They learned songs that praised courage and strength. They watched their brothers train and sometimes mocked them to push them harder. Even as children, Spartan girls carried themselves with a calm confidence that set them apart from other Greek women. Back in the city, adults lived with a sense of duty that never left them. Men spent most of their time in military groups, even in times of peace. They ate together in simple dining halls called syssitia, where the food was plain and often unappetizing. A thick, dark soup made from pig blood vinegar and salt was common. Travelers from other Greek cities often recoiled at the taste, but Spartans ate it without complaint. For them, food was not about pleasure. It was fuel, nothing more. Women managed households and controlled the family's land. They spoke openly in public, something rare in other Greek cities. Because the men were often away, Spartan women grew used to making decisions. They were respected but also watched closely. Their duty was to preserve the household and raise children who embodied the city's values. The rhythms of Spartan life were quiet but intense. Every sunrise brought training, patrols, or work in the fields. Every sunset brought rituals, quiet conversations, or simple rest. And through it all, the people lived with a constant awareness of their neighbors, the helots, who were the enslaved population forced to farm the land. The helots worked the soil, carried heavy baskets, and lived in fear, for they knew the Spartans viewed them as a threat. The Spartans never forgot that the helots outnumbered them. This fear shaped the city's strict rules, its constant training, and its harsh methods of control. As the years passed, boys grew into young men. They moved from sleeping halls to barracks where discipline was even stricter. Their bodies hardened, their minds sharpened. They learned to speak little and observe much. Silence was valued, for a quiet soldier revealed nothing to the enemy. But even in such a rigid world, moments of softness appeared. A young man might glance at the mountains during sunrise and feel a moment of peace. Children might laugh briefly during their rare free time, chasing one another in the dust. A mother might whisper a gentle word to a son before he left for training, even though she knew she should stay stern. These moments did not break the Spartan way of life. They simply reminded them that beneath the armor, beneath the discipline, they were still human. And so, life continued in the valley. Days passed, marked by training, work, and worry. Nights passed, filled with quiet thoughts and the distant rustle of wind through olive trees. Sparta's people endured because they believed endurance was the only way to survive. As the valley woke each morning, the pale light of dawn touched the rooftops of Sparta. The houses were simple, with hard, packed earth floors and wooden beams that creaked softly when the wind pushed against them. Smoke drifted up from cooking fires. Even from far away, anyone walking through the edge of the town could smell the dry wood burning, mixed with the scent of barley that many families prepared at the start of the day. For the boys in training, mornings began before the sun fully rose. A trainer entered their hall, his footsteps measured and steady. He would speak only a few words, but the boys understood them. They rose from their reed mats, rubbed sleep from their eyes, and gathered outside in the chill air. Their thin tunics did nothing to block the cold, so their skin prickled as they stood in small groups, waiting for orders. They were tired most days. Sleep came lightly in the barracks, disturbed by the shifting bodies around them and the firmness of their bedding. But Spartans believed that comfort bred weakness, and weakness invited danger. So the boys learned to push through the heaviness in their limbs. Their first tasks were simple but strict. They ran across uneven ground that scraped their feet. They carried stones from one place to another, learning to move in a unified rhythm. They practiced wrestling moves on dusty earth, each boy trying to gain leverage over another while keeping his breathing steady. If anyone complained, even quietly, the older boys or trainers corrected them with sharp commands or brief punishments that left no room for argument. Despite the hardness of this life, some boys grew to enjoy the challenge. They felt pride when they did well. They felt pride when they kept up with the strongest among them. They learned to read one another's movements, to sense when someone needed help, and to work together without speaking. These small bonds became important. They would one day form the tight lines of soldiers who trusted each other more than anything else in the world. Meanwhile, the girls of Sparta also began their day with physical training. They ran along open fields, their feet pounding the earth in steady rhythms. They jumped over small ditches and practiced throwing stones at targets set up near olive groves. Their training helped them build strong bodies, but it also built strong spirits. From a young age, they were told that courage was natural, that a sharp mind and a firm voice were not just allowed but respected. A visitor from another Greek city would have been surprised to see girls running freely, their hair tied back, their voices loud with determined breathing. But in Sparta, people believed that women needed strength just as much as men. They would raise children who would endure the city's demands. They would manage land, speak in assemblies, and protect the city when the men were away. Their lives were different from the boys, but their sense of purpose was just as firm. As the sun climbed higher, the adults of Sparta moved into their routines. Men spent their time in military groups, and even when they were not engaged in war, they drilled with their weapons. Shields were polished until they shone faintly in the Greek sunlight. Spears were checked for cracks in the wood. Armor was maintained with great care, for any weak point could mean death in battle. But training was not only physical. Spartans practiced speaking in short, clear phrases. They believed that few words carried greater strength than many. A Spartan's silence became a type of skill, one learned through years of discipline. They did not waste breath. They spoke with intent, always considering whether their words served a purpose. Women, meanwhile, oversaw the household crops. They inspected fields of barley and wheat, checked the health of their olive trees, and made sure the helots, who labored under constant pressure, were doing the work expected of them. Helots were essential to Sparta's survival, but they also lived with fear every day. They knew that the Spartans saw them as both necessary and dangerous. They outnumbered the Spartan citizens, and for that reason the city's strict rules and constant watchfulness grew from deep tension. Sometimes a helot in the fields would hear the distant sound of young men marching in formation, their sandals hitting the earth with perfect rhythm. That sound reminded them that Sparta's power rested on the discipline of its warriors. It also reminded them that rebellion was impossible. The Spartans were trained from childhood to suppress any uprising quickly and without hesitation. Even so, helots had lives of their own in quiet moments. They tended small family plots when allowed. They told stories to their children at night, stories of the land before Spartan dominance. They cooked meals from simple ingredients, mixing herbs with barley to create warm, filling dishes. These moments gave them strength, brief but precious. Back within the city, Spartan children continued their long days. After morning training, boys returned to halls where they learned simple tasks. They practiced making repairs to their clothing, sewing small tears caused by running, wrestling, or collecting reeds. They learned songs that spoke of old battles and the heroes who fought in them. The songs were steady, rhythmic, easy to memorize. Their voices echoed through the training grounds, creating a sense of unity. They also learned to read and write, but only enough to serve practical needs. Spartan leaders believed that too much focus on words could soften a soldier's resolve, so literacy was functional, stripped of decoration or philosophy. Boys copied simple lines onto boards, their hands moving slowly, their concentration fixed. When they finished, an instructor examined their work with sharp eyes, nodding when it was acceptable and offering quiet correction when it was not. In the afternoon, the heat grew stronger. Dust rose from the ground with every step. The boys continued practicing combat skills, learning how to block a strike with a shield or how to push forward as a group. The older boys guided the younger ones, teaching them how to fall without injury and how to rise quickly. Even the smallest details mattered. A mistake in training could mean disaster in war. But the boys did not spend all their time in harsh drills. There were moments when they rested under the shade of trees. They drank water slowly, letting it cool their throats. Some boys talked in low voices about their families, wondering how their parents were doing. Others shared stories they had heard, tales of distant cities with tall buildings and busy markets. These moments of quiet conversation gave them relief from the pressure of the agoge. Still, rest never lasted long. As soon as the trainers signaled that it was time to resume, the boys stood up without hesitation. Their bodies were tired, but they moved with determination, knowing that hesitation could bring consequences. Girls spent their afternoons helping their mothers or other women with household tasks. They learned how to weave wool into strong, practical garments. They learned how to prepare food that nourished their families. But even these tasks were done with purpose and strength. A girl might knead bread dough with firm hands, shaping it into round loaves to bake in clay ovens. She might carry heavy baskets of olives without complaint. Her mind focused on completing the work. The women spoke openly with one another during these tasks. They discussed the city's needs, the crops in the fields, the behavior of the young boys in training, and the health of the soldiers. They offered support when needed, and they challenged one another when the moment called for it. Their voices carried a confidence that came from living in a society where female responsibility was recognized as essential. As daylight faded, Sparta grew quieter. The boys gathered again in their halls, eating their simple evening meal. It often consisted of coarse bread and a small portion of the black broth that outsiders found so difficult to swallow. The boys ate slowly, knowing that the meal would not fill them completely. Hunger was something they learned to live with. It sharpened their senses, made them more alert, and taught them to be resourceful. After dinner, they listened to older boys or instructors tell stories of past wars. These stories were not grand or poetic. They were plain and direct, focusing on the lessons learned, the courage shown, and the mistakes made. The boys absorbed these stories, knowing they were preparing for a future in which they would stand in the shield wall, shoulder to shoulder with their comrades. Outside, the wind moved softly through the valley. The mountains surrounding Sparta cast long shadows as the last light faded. The helots returned to their small homes, exhausted from their labor. Women tended to evening tasks, making sure fires were covered and tools put away. Men finished their training routines, wiped sweat from their faces, and returned to their communal dining halls for simple meals and quiet discussions. Even though Sparta was known for its discipline, the nights allowed a rare softness. The city grew still, its people resting in preparation for the next day. Children fell asleep quickly, their bodies drained from hours of activity. The older boys lay awake sometimes, thinking about their progress, wondering how they measured up to others. They worried about letting their comrades down, a fear that grew stronger each year. Young women sat near their homes, talking in low voices with family members. They watched the stars appear one by one over the valley. They felt the cool air settle on their skin. They dreamed of the future, a future where they might raise children, manage land, and shape the next generation of Spartans. As the night deepened, Sparta became quiet enough that one could hear distant animals moving in the fields. The soft sound of a dog barking, the faint rustle of olive branches, the breathing of the city itself, and beneath that peaceful surface, the weight of Sparta's expectations pressed on every person. Duty shaped every step, discipline guided every choice, survival defined every rule. This sense of pressure, this constant awareness of danger, created a society unlike any other in ancient Greece. The Spartans believed that only through strict control and tireless training could their city endure. They lived with a seriousness that seemed unbreakable, yet within that seriousness lived real people. Children with fears, women with hopes, men with quiet doubts. Over time, the boys of the agoge grew into young men ready to join full military life. Their final years in the training program were the hardest. They moved from learning basic skills to mastering complex formations. They practiced marching in perfect lines, each step matching the next. They learned how to use their shields not only for protection, but also as tools to push enemies back. They trained with wooden spears until their arms ached. They ran long distances under the weight of armor to prepare for long campaigns. Their instructors watched closely, noting who showed courage and who faltered. Those who struggled were not cast out, but they faced greater pressure. The Spartans believed that teamwork made them strong, and a group was only as reliable as its weakest member. So the boys supported one another, even when exhausted. These final years of training also taught them how to live with very little. They learned to sleep in short stretches, to stay alert in darkness, and to silence their fears. They learned to move through forests without breaking branches, to travel at night using only the stars for guidance, and to sense danger before it revealed itself. Some young men found these skills came naturally. Others worked tirelessly, repeating the same actions until they felt right. All of them, however, shared the same goal: to become part of the powerful Spartan army that had earned respect and fear throughout Greece. As they prepared to join the ranks, they also faced one final test. It was a quiet test, rarely spoken about. They had to spend time alone in the wild, surviving with only their wits. It was not a grand ritual. There were no spectators. Only the young man and the land. He had to find food, hide his tracks, and avoid danger. When he returned, he carried a new sense of confidence and a deeper understanding of the skills he had learned. When a young man finally completed all his training, he joined a Sicilian, a dining group of soldiers who bonded through shared meals and shared duties. Acceptance into such a group was essential. Without it, a man could not fully belong to Spartan society. These dining groups formed the heart of Spartan unity. Men ate together, trained together, discussed tactics together, and supported one another. Their loyalty to their comrades became as strong as their loyalty to the city itself. As years passed, these men grew into seasoned warriors. They marched on campaigns when needed. They patrolled the lands surrounding Sparta, keeping watch over both external threats and internal unrest. They lived with constant caution, but they also felt pride in their roles. They believed that their lives had meaning because they served something greater than themselves. Yet even the strongest soldier had quiet moments. Sitting by a fire at night, sharpening a spearhead, he might think of the fields where he grew up. He might remember his mother's steady voice or the face of a childhood friend. He might look up at the stars and wonder if Sparta would someday change, or if it would remain forever locked in its rigid way of life. Women aged into leaders of their households, respected for their strength and wisdom. They saw their children grow, enter the agoge, and begin the long journey toward adulthood. They offered guidance in their own firm way, encouraging bravery and discipline. They managed the land with skill, making sure the crops survived harsh seasons. Their authority was recognized even by the men, for Spartan society depended on their organizational strength. Helots continued their work in the fields, living with the same mixture of fear and resilience that had shaped their community for generations. They found comfort in the small joys of daily life, a shared meal, the laughter of a child, the warmth of sunlight on their backs. They supported one another quietly, forming bonds that helped them endure the hardships placed upon them. Across all these lives, the rhythm of Sparta remained the same. Days were built on repetition, strength, and purpose. Nights were filled with quiet thoughts and unspoken hopes. The people were shaped by the land, the rules, and the constant demand for discipline. Time moved steadily, just as it always had, and just as it always would. The days in Sparta continued one after another, steady as the movement of the sun across the valley. Even though the people lived with constant pressure, life settled into a familiar rhythm that shaped the entire community. Children grew into youths, youths grew into adults, and adults watched the next generation rise behind them, repeating the same routines their ancestors had followed for centuries. One of the most striking things about the city was how quiet it often seemed. Unlike other Greek towns, where merchants called out in crowded marketplaces, Sparta had no bustling center filled with noise. Instead, it had wide open spaces where people moved with purpose, seldom lingering without reason. A traveler arriving for the first time might feel as if the city carried a hush over it, a calm that came not from peace but from discipline. In the early mornings, before most people were awake, a thin mist often drifted through the valley. It clung to the ground and curled around the olive trees, making the fields look almost like a calm sea. Farmers among the helots stepped outside their homes and checked the sky, searching for signs that the weather might turn. They had learned to read the land with careful eyes. A certain shift in the wind could mean a dry season ahead. The color of clouds near the mountains might suggest heavy rain. They relied on these signals because the crops they tended determined how the entire city survived. As they walked through the fields, they carried simple tools. Wooden handles worn smooth through generations, blades that had been sharpened so many times that the metal had thinned at certain points. They worked slowly but steadily, turning the soil, pulling weeds, checking irrigation channels. They were watched, always watched, but they tried to keep their minds focused on the small details of the earth beneath their feet. Meanwhile, Spartan youths began their day with the same mix of eagerness and tension. By the time they reached their early teenage years, the training grew more intense. Their bodies had hardened from years of running, wrestling, and carrying weight across rough terrain. Their faces showed fewer signs of childhood softness. Their eyes carried a sharper focus, shaped by both pride and expectation. They practiced fighting in pairs, learning how to react to different movements without hesitation. A sudden step forward, a shift of weight, a quick change of angle. These details became part of their instincts. They learned to anticipate before the action even happened. Their instructors taught them not to rely on strength alone, but to understand timing, distance, and balance. A good soldier was calm under threat and steady under pressure. During these years, the youth also learned something even more important: unity. They were told often that a Spartan soldier fought not for himself, but for the person beside him. A shield was held not only to protect the man who carried it, but also to guard the person standing to his left. This idea shaped their thinking, their behavior, and their sense of responsibility. It was drilled into them until it felt as natural as breathing. At times, the young men felt the weight of this expectation. When they looked around the training grounds and saw those beside them, they felt a quiet understanding that each life depended on the others. It was a heavy truth to carry, especially for someone still growing into adulthood, yet they learned to bear it with a calm determination. The evenings offered small reliefs. Sometimes, older men would join the youths to watch their exercises and offer brief words of advice. These words were never long speeches. A simple sentence spoken with slow confidence meant more to a Spartan youth than a loud display of encouragement. The youths absorbed these quiet lessons, taking pride in earning the respect of those who had already proven themselves. On certain nights, after dinner, the youths gathered around fires outside the barracks. They listened to stories from seasoned soldiers who had returned from distant campaigns. The soldiers spoke about the harsh cold of winter marches, when the wind cut through armor and every breath released a small cloud of frost. They spoke about the heat of summer battles, when sweat mixed with dust and dried on their skin like a second layer of clay. They described standing in the phalanx formation, shield locked against shield, hearing nothing but the sound of their comrades, breathing as the enemy approached. The youths listened with a mix of fear and fascination. They imagined themselves in those same lines, holding their ground with the same quiet resolve. They wondered if they would feel strong enough, brave enough, ready enough. These thoughts lingered in their minds long after the fires burned down to soft embers. As the boys and girls of Sparta grew older, they became aware of the structure of their society in a deeper way. They saw how tightly the city held itself together. The rules were firm, but many believed the rules kept them safe. Without such discipline, the helots might rise in rebellion. Without constant training, enemy armies from other Greek city-states might threaten their lands. Without unity, the entire system could weaken. This constant awareness shaped the people's view of the world. For youths, it meant understanding that their lives were part of something larger. They were not raised to seek personal glory or individual achievements. Instead, they were expected to serve the greater strength of the city. It was a heavy burden, but also a source of pride. They believed they were part of something ancient, something unbroken, something that demanded complete dedication. Women in Sparta aged into respected figures. Their authority within the home grew stronger with time. A woman who managed her family's land well gained admiration. One who raised disciplined children gained respect. Because the men were often away for long periods, the women shaped the daily rhythm of the city. They organized the harvest, secured goods for the household, and made decisions when problems arose. Their strength was not hidden but expected. In the evening, women sometimes gathered in small groups outside their homes, talking softly as the sky darkened. A child might sit nearby, listening without understanding every word, but sensing the calm confidence in the adults' voices. These conversations shaped the child's earliest memories of community, helping them understand how people relied on one another. Helots returned from the fields in low light, their clothes marked with dust and the smell of earth. They shared simple meals in their homes, often made from vegetables they had grown themselves. They spoke to one another in hushed tones about the day's events, the tasks ahead, and the stories of their elders. Their world was built on caution, but within their own spaces they found warmth, comfort, and connection. Children among the helots learned early that silence outside the home meant safety, but laughter inside the home meant family. As years passed, the city continued to move in its firm rhythm. Seasons changed, bringing new challenges. Winter brought cold winds that swept down from the mountains, making every outdoor task more difficult. The youths trained in these conditions without complaint, learning to push through numb fingers and aching muscles. Summer brought heat that dried the earth until small cracks formed in the ground. Sweat dripped from their faces, but they continued their drills, stepping through dust clouds that rose with each movement. These conditions shaped their endurance. They learned to control their breathing, slow and steady, so that they could continue working even under fatigue. Their instructors watched them closely, looking not only for physical strength, but for the quiet inner steadiness that marked a true Spartan. When a young man reached adulthood, he joined a group of soldiers who had already spent years together. This transition was significant, but it did not involve grand ceremonies. Instead, it happened quietly, often with only a few words exchanged. The young warrior was welcomed into the Sicilian, the shared mess hall where he would spend much of his adult life. Here, bonds grew deeper. Men spoke with honesty about tactics, land, family, and duty. They shared struggles and offered guidance to younger soldiers. The meals remained simple, sometimes even unpleasant, but the conversations shaped a sense of unity more powerful than any feast. The men learned how to trust one another not only in battle, but in daily life. When arguments arose, they were resolved with few words. Spartan men believed that clarity kept the group strong. Life in Sparta continued to revolve around these routines. Training, farming, managing households, standing watch, guiding the next generation. Every age held a purpose. Every person played a role. Every day reinforced the idea that survival depended on discipline. Even in such a strict society, the people felt moments of quiet emotion. A mother watching her son run across a field, moving with the strength she had hoped to see in him. A young soldier feeling pride the first time he stood in formation with his comrades. A helot father telling his child an old story from the time before Spartan rule, hoping to keep some memory alive. These gentle moments softened the edges of their difficult lives, creating a sense of humanity beneath the rigid expectations. The mountains around Sparta stood like silent guardians, watching over the city. They had seen countless generations rise, train, struggle, and pass into memory. They held the echoes of children's voices, the clatter of weapons, and the murmured prayers spoken by families in times of worry. The city rested in their shadow, shaped by both the danger and protection the mountains offered. As the story of Sparta moved forward year by year, the city remained loyal to its ways. The people continued to endure. The youths continued to rise. The soldiers continued their watch. And through all of it, the simple truth remained: life in ancient Sparta was hard, shaped by fear, discipline, and duty, but also by quiet resilience and human connection. As the years continued to flow through the valley like a quiet river, Sparta shaped every person who lived there. The city felt timeless, as if it carried the same heartbeat generation after generation. The people understood their place in that rhythm, and although life was harsh, they moved through it with a kind of calm acceptance. They believed their hardships formed a shield that protected them from chaos beyond their borders. At the start of each day, the city woke gradually. The earliest activity came from the helots working the fields. Before the sun painted the mountains with pale colors, they were already walking through the cool morning air. Their feet pressed softly into the dirt paths leading to the farmland, and their voices murmured in quiet conversations, spoken low so as not to draw unwanted attention. They carried baskets, tools, or handfuls of seeds depending on the season. Each time the helots stepped into the fields, they felt the familiar weight of their duties. They knew that no matter how hard they worked, they lived in a place where freedom always sat out of reach. Yet they continued to show resilience, caring for the land with a kind of steady patience. The soil held their stories. It held the memories of generations before them who had done the same work under the same system. But the soil also held their hopes, quiet and hidden, shaped into the grooves left by their ploughs, and the footprints their children would someday replace with their own. As the helots tended to the earth, the young Spartans began their morning training. The air carried a slight chill, and the sky glowed with soft pink and gold. The youths assembled in lines, sleepy but determined, rubbing their hands together as they prepared for the day's tasks. Their instructors moved among them, checking posture, checking readiness, reminding them with a single word or gesture that focus was expected even at dawn. They began with simple stretches, slow movements meant to wake their muscles. Then they transitioned into runs across open fields, kicking up dust that drifted behind them. Even when tired, they ran with controlled breaths, keeping their steps in rhythm with those beside them. Some mornings the ground felt hard and cold under their bare feet. Other mornings it felt warm from the previous day's heat. But every morning they felt themselves growing stronger. After running, they practiced drills with wooden spears. The practice weapons were roughly carved and heavier than real spears, designed to build strength in their arms. They thrust forward, pulled back, stepped to the side, and repeated the motions until their shoulders burned. Sweat gathered on their brows, dripping down their faces, mixing with the dust clinging to their skin. Sometimes older boys watched from a distance, remembering the days when they had stood in those same spots, repeating the same motions. They did not smile often, but there was a quiet sense of recognition in the way they observed the younger ones, as if seeing reflections of their own past struggles. Meanwhile, the girls began their morning routines as well. Their lives had their own rhythm, shaped by the city's expectations. They ran alongside one another, their steps sure and strong. They practiced throwing stones or javelins, aiming at wooden targets that stood against the old walls surrounding the training grounds. Their training did not prepare them for battle the way the boys' training did, but it developed their physical strength, discipline, and confidence. Spartan women were expected to speak their minds, manage households with authority, and raise children who could withstand the city's demands. Their training reflected this purpose. It shaped their voices, their posture, and their sense of self. After physical training, girls often helped with tasks in the home. They learned to weave wool, a skill that required patience and precision. The thread had to be pulled, spun, and shaped into cloth with steady hands. The work was slow but calming. As they sat beside older women, listening to the soft sounds of wool sliding through fingers and wooden tools tapping lightly, they learned not only about weaving, but also about life in their community. They heard stories from their mothers and grandmothers about the years before they were born. Stories about harsh winters, bountiful harvests, moments of fear, and moments of pride. These stories connected them to the long line of women who had shaped Sparta's households for centuries. They understood that their strength did not come from battlefields, but from the quiet endurance of daily life. While the children trained and learned, the adult men moved through their own routines. Many of them spent the day practicing in military formations. Even when there was no war on the horizon, they believed that the ability to move as one body, one shield wall, one force of protection, could never be allowed to weaken. They stepped in unison, their shields brushing against each other with soft thudding sounds. The ground shook slightly beneath their synchronized movements. Their instructors watched closely, paying attention to the smallest details. How high a shield was held, how quickly a spear tip aligned, how steady a soldier remained when pushed from the side. These details could shape the outcome of a battle. They could decide whether a line held firm or collapsed under pressure. The men knew this and focused with complete seriousness. During midday, when the sun rose high and cast sharp shadows across the city, Sparta entered a brief period of relative quiet. The youths rested in the shade, drinking water from clay vessels. Their breath slowed and their bodies relaxed, though their minds remained alert. Even rest was taken with purpose. Helots poured in the fields as well, wiping sweat from their foreheads and eating simple meals of bread, olives, and sometimes dried figs. They did not sit long, for the tasks of the day were many, and they understood that their work had to continue whether they felt ready or not. But those short moments under the shade of olive trees offered small comfort before they rose again. As afternoon arrived, the city's energy shifted once more. The boys returned to training grounds for wrestling exercises. They faced one another on smooth patches of dirt, each trying to throw the other to the ground using technique rather than brute force. They learned to keep their balance, to anticipate movements, to stay calm even when pinned. These lessons mattered, for a soldier who panicked was a danger to himself and his comrades. The girls spent the afternoon balancing physical activities with practical chores. They carried water from wells, learning to walk with steady control so the filled vessels did not spill. They worked in gardens, tending to herbs used for cooking and basic medicinal needs. They helped prepare meals, stirring pots of barley soup, arranging bread to bake, and learning how to season food with simple spices. In the evenings, as the sun lowered behind the mountains, the city grew softer. The harsh light softened into warm golden hues, touching the buildings, fields, and people with gentle color. The boys gathered for their evening meal, sharing the simple food placed before them. They ate quietly, listening for instructions or stories from older boys. The girls returned home to sit with their families, sharing food and conversation. Parents asked about the day's training, not expecting dramatic stories, but wanting to hear how their children were learning, growing, and handling the demands of their routines. These evening conversations held warmth, even if the words were few. Across the city, soldiers gathered in their dining groups, eating meals that had been shared countless times before. They sat on wooden benches, their legs stretched comfortably before them, their shields resting against nearby walls. They spoke in low voices about the tasks of the day, the state of the fields, and the behavior of younger soldiers. Their conversations shaped the unity of the group. A soldier who ate with the same men each night learned to understand them deeply. He knew who reacted quickly, who remained calm under threat, who needed a quiet word of encouragement, and who offered steady support through action rather than speech. These relationships strengthened the city's defensive core. As night spread across the valley, Sparta grew calm. The wind softened. The stars appeared slowly, first a few, then many, until the entire sky shimmered gently overhead. Children fell asleep quickly after long days. Adults settled into small moments of quiet before resting themselves. Yet beneath the calm, the city's heavy expectations remained. Every person understood their role, their place, and the weight they carried. Some felt pride, some felt fear. Most felt a mixture of both, shaped by the realities of life in a society that demanded constant readiness. Even so, there were moments, small, quiet, fragile moments, when the harshness of Spartan life softened. A mother smoothing her child's hair before bed. A young boy whispering to his friend in the dark barracks, sharing a worry he could not say aloud during the day. A helot father humming a short tune to help his daughter fall asleep. These moments existed quietly, almost hidden, but they were real, and they reminded everyone that despite the strict rules, the people still carried hearts that felt deeply. As the years moved on, the youths grew taller and stronger. Their voices deepened. Their movements became more sure. Their minds sharpened with experience. They approached the stage of life where they would join the adult ranks, leaving behind the final traces of childhood. This transition carried both excitement and fear. Some nights, young men lay awake thinking about the responsibilities ahead. They wondered whether they would succeed, whether they would earn the respect of their comrades, whether they would live up to the expectations placed upon them since birth. These quiet doubts were never spoken publicly, but they lived in the shadows of the mind, only disappearing as confidence grew. In time, each youth reached that point when he would face new trials. Some trials involved physical endurance, long marches through rough terrain, nights spent awake listening for signs of danger, tasks performed in complete darkness. Others were tests of restraint, requiring silence, patience, and the ability to remain calm even when discomfort pressed in from all sides. The land around Sparta played a large role in these trials. The mountains, forests, and streams created natural challenges. A young man had to learn how to navigate rocky paths without slipping, how to move through thick undergrowth without making noise, and how to keep his bearings even when the sky was too cloudy to see the stars. These experiences taught him how to survive, how to remain unnoticed when necessary, and how to maintain a steady presence even when alone. They shaped the kind of soldier he would become. Meanwhile, the young women also faced transitions in their lives. Their roles became more defined. They began to assist their families in managing land, guiding younger children, and preparing for their future responsibilities as mothers and caretakers of the household. They carried themselves with dignity, aware that confidence was a valued trait among Spartan women. Their days grew fuller, their tasks more complex. Yet they continued to find moments of peace, moments that came during quiet walks through the fields, during evenings spent weaving in the soft glow of firelight, or during times when they gathered with other young women to share stories and thoughts about the future. As all of these changes unfolded, the city of Sparta remained steady in its customs. It had built itself on tradition, and it continued to rely on the same principles generation after generation. But beneath those traditions lived the personal experiences of each individual, experiences filled with effort, doubt, pride, and resilience. Night after night, the city rested under the same stars that had watched over it for centuries. The people slept, their breaths rising and falling in a calm rhythm, preparing their bodies and minds for another day in a world shaped by discipline and endurance. The story continues far deeper, with many more years and many more layers of Spartan life to explore. As seasons passed, the valley around Sparta shifted its colors with quiet certainty. Spring crept in first, touching the fields with a faint shimmer of green. Tiny flowers peeked between stones in the hills, their petals trembling in soft breezes. Birds returned from distant places, filling the mornings with uneven melodies that broke the harsh silence of winter. Though Sparta was known for discipline, nature paid little attention to human expectations, and its gentle rhythms softened even the strictest days. During this season, the youth's training took on a different mood. The ground, once hard and cold beneath their feet, warmed with the sun. The air smelled of earth and young plants, and the winds carried the scent of pine from the mountains. Though their routines did not change, the environment around them did, and it brought a subtle shift in their spirits. They felt lighter. Their steps felt less heavy. The mornings seemed brighter, as if the entire city breathed more easily. One early morning, a young Spartan boy named Cleomenes woke before the rest of his group. He lay still for a moment on his thin bedding, listening to the quiet breaths of his companions sleeping around him in the dim barracks. A faint grey light crept through the narrow windows, promising sunrise. Something inside him stirred, not fear, not excitement, but a sense of restlessness he couldn't name. He stood quietly and stepped outside. The air was crisp, carrying a hint of lingering night cold. He walked toward the outskirts of the training grounds, where a low hill overlooked the valley. From there he could see the farmlands stretching in soft shadows and the distant peaks glowing faintly with the earliest rays of morning light. He wasn't supposed to leave the barracks early without permission, but he felt drawn to the view. He stood there, breathing steadily, feeling the weight of expectation settle on his shoulders. He knew he would soon face new trials. He had grown taller in the past year. His voice deepened, and his instructors had begun watching him with sharper eyes. They expected him to become an example to younger boys. Disciplined, calm, unshakable. But alone on the hillside, Cleomenes allowed himself to feel uncertain. He looked out over the fields and wondered whether strength always meant having no fears. He wondered if a soldier was allowed to feel overwhelmed. He wondered whether doubt made him weak or simply human. Before he could settle his thoughts, he heard quiet footsteps behind him. He turned to see an older instructor approaching. Damarian, a man known for his calm presence and few words. His face held no anger, no surprise, only a steady expression, as if he had expected to find someone awake at this hour. "You rose early," Damarian said. Cleomenes lowered his head respectfully. "Yes, instructor." Damarian stepped beside him and looked out over the valley. "Tell me what brought you here." The boy hesitated. Words crowded in his chest, but Spartans were taught not to reveal too much. Yet something about the quiet morning made honesty easier. "I wanted to breathe," Cleomenes said softly. "Before training begins, before the day becomes heavy." Damarian nodded. "Even iron must cool between hammer strikes." Cleomenes looked up at him, startled by the metaphor. "Strength," Damarian continued, "is not the absence of strain. It is the ability to carry it without breaking. Sometimes that requires silence. Sometimes that requires stillness. What matters is that you rise again." The boy felt a slow relief settle inside him. He had expected a scolding. Instead, he received a small piece of wisdom he had not known he needed. Damarian placed a hand on his shoulder. "Return now. The others will wake soon." Cleomenes bowed his head, then walked back toward the barracks with steady steps. His doubts did not vanish, but they no longer frightened him. They felt like something he could carry. That same morning, in another part of the city, a young woman named Theonia helped her mother prepare herbs in the courtyard of their home. Spring brought new growth, and the garden was full of fresh leaves needing to be dried and stored. Theonia's hands moved with practiced ease. She tied bundles of thyme with thin strands of fibre, laid mint leaves on woven mats, and sorted lavender into clay bowls. Her mother, Dyrene, watched quietly before speaking. "You work with care," Dyrene said. Theonia smiled. "The plants deserve care." Her mother tilted her head. "Everything worth doing deserves care." Theonia paused, sensing her mother's deeper meaning. In recent weeks, older women had begun asking Theonia about her future. Whether she had thought of marriage, whether she felt ready to manage a household. Theonia felt a flutter of nerves each time the subject came up. She wasn't afraid of responsibility, she simply felt unprepared for the shift it would bring. Her days were already full of learning, training, and helping her family. The idea of adding even more weight to her path made her uncertain. Dyrene noticed her daughter's subtle tension. She reached out and touched Theonia's wrist lightly. "Do not hurry to become what others expect," she said. "You will step into your path when you are ready. Not before." Theonia took a slow breath. Her mother's reassurance eased her uncertainty, but the thoughts continued swirling. She wondered whether she would ever feel completely prepared for adulthood. She wondered how women before her had known when the time was right. She wondered whether readiness came all at once or slowly, like the ripening of fruit on a branch. She returned to her work, letting her hands find their rhythm among the herbs. The quiet sounds of leaves rustling and twine tightening felt grounding. She found comfort in small tasks that held meaning without pressure. Later that afternoon, the helots worked in the fields under the warm sun. Among them was an older man named Terry, known for his quiet patience and gentle strength. He bent over the soil, guiding young shoots into neat rows, while a boy, his son, Lycos, worked beside him. Lycos was quick, energetic, and curious. He asked questions at every opportunity, sometimes too many at once. "Father," Lycos said, "do you think the crops will grow faster now? The rain was good last night. They will grow as they always do." Terion replied with a small smile. "The land listens to the seasons, not our hopes." The boy nodded thoughtfully. "Do you think one day I'll be strong enough to lift the big baskets like you?" Terion looked at his son's thin arms and laughed softly. "In time, strength grows the way plants do, little by little, every day." The boy grinned and kept working. Though their lives were constrained and controlled, these small exchanges gave them a sense of connection and warmth. Terion paused to stretch his back and looked out across the field. He saw other families working silently, the rhythm of their movements shaped by necessity. He also saw the distant shapes of Spartan youths training on nearby grounds, their shouts and thudding footsteps echoing faintly. He knew his son watched those young soldiers sometimes with mixed curiosity and fear. Helot children learned early about the boundaries between themselves and Spartan citizens. Terion wished he could protect his son from that harsh knowledge, but reality taught it sooner than he could. Still, he hoped to give Lycos something else. A sense of worth that did not depend on status. A sense of identity rooted in family, land, and inner strength. So he placed a hand on the boy's shoulder and said, "You are growing well, not just in muscles but in heart." Lycos beamed with pride. Those simple words shaped him more than he understood. As the sun dipped lower, Sparta shifted once again into its quiet evening rhythm. Fires flickered in homes. The smell of cooking drifted between narrow streets. Families gathered. Soldiers joined their dining groups. Children settled into rest. In one household, a grandmother named Aristia told stories to a circle of young girls. Her voice was soft, worn by years, yet steady as a river. She spoke of ancient winters when snow fell thick and cold, and the city pulled together to survive. She spoke of brave women who kept families alive when men were away. She spoke of long-ago harvests, celebrations, and storms. Her stories carried lessons hidden within them. Lessons about patience, courage, and the unbroken thread of continuity that tied the present to the past. The girls listened with wide eyes, leaning closer as shadows danced across their faces. They absorbed every detail, storing the stories in their hearts. They did not ask questions. They simply listened, knowing the words would grow inside them over time. One girl, Ariste the youngest, curled her fingers around her grandmother's hand and whispered, "Will I be strong someday, too?" Aristia smiled. "You already are." Night settled over the valley. The stars shimmered above distant mountains. The wind rustled through olive trees and carried the faint scent of earth into the sleeping city. Sparta rested, but life continued to shape every person quietly, steadily, like river water carving stone. New challenges stirred on the horizon. New growth waited beneath the soil. New choices would soon rise for Cleomenes, for Theonia, for Terry and Lycos, and for countless others whose lives wove together in ways they did not yet see. The world was changing, even if slowly. And Sparta, despite its traditions, would soon feel the pull of those changes. Night faded slowly over the valley, and another Spartan morning began. The first light touched the tiled roofs of the city, then the courtyards, then the training grounds. A thin layer of dew clung to the grass, shining faintly before warming into mist. Birds stirred in the olive trees, offering short, scattered calls that broke the silence of dawn. In the barracks, the boys rose before the sun climbed high. Cleomenes woke among them, his thoughts steadier than they had been the day before. The quiet moment he shared on the hillside with Damarian had settled into him like cooling metal, firming something inside that had felt uncertain. He stretched his limbs and stepped outside as the others prepared for their morning tasks. The cold air hit his skin, and he felt alert. The sky held streaks of pale gold, promising a warm day ahead. On the far edge of the training field, he noticed an older group of young men beginning their own drills, their movements sharp and well practiced. He watched them for a moment, studying how they shifted their weight during each step, how their stances remained firm, even when pivoting quickly. He imagined himself moving with that same ease one day. Behind him, one of the boys from his age group, Nicandros, called out, "Cleomenes, come." They're forming lines. He turned and jogged back to join the others. Their instructor walked slowly along the rows, observing each face with quiet intensity. No harsh words were spoken today. No commands barked. Instead, he moved with a calm awareness, taking note of who looked focused, who stared into the distance, who seemed tired. When he stopped before Cleomenes, he held the boy's gaze for a moment. There was no judgment in his eyes, only expectation. Then he turned and gave the day's first instruction. Begin. The lines shifted into formation. Feet moved. Sand stirred beneath them. The day's training had begun. The routine would last hours, but Spartan youths learned not to measure time. They learned to focus on each motion, each breath, each correction. When the sun rose fully above the mountains, they had already been at work long enough for sweat to form on their backs. Their bodies warmed, then grew tired, then pushed past that tiredness until a new steadiness settled into them. During a period of paired drills, Cleomenes sparred with Nicandros. The two boys had trained together for years, and they understood one another's tendencies. Nicandros stepped in fast, always leading with strength. Cleomenes relied more on balance, reacting with smooth, controlled movements. Their wooden practice weapons clicked and thudded against each other. At one point, Nicandros pushed forward with a sudden burst of energy that almost knocked Cleomenes off balance. But Cleomenes shifted his weight, pivoted, and held his ground. Nicandros backed away with a sharp breath, surprised. "You didn't move this way last month." But Cleomenes felt a small spark of pride but kept his voice even. "I'm learning." Before Nicandros could respond, the instructor approached. He nodded once, a sign of acknowledgement that felt more rewarding than praise spoken aloud. Then he moved on. The rest of the morning passed in steady effort. When the youths were finally dismissed for a brief rest, they scattered across the shade of nearby buildings, drinking water from clay jugs and stretching weary limbs. Cleomenes sat beside Nicandros, rolling his shoulders to ease the tension. "You've changed," Nicandros said quietly, not looking at him. "Since yesterday." Cleomenes considered this. "Maybe," he said. "Maybe I just understand something new." Nicandros nodded slowly, accepting the answer without pressing for details. Elsewhere in the city, Theonia walked along a narrow stone path lined with fig trees. She carried a basket filled with herbs and cloth bundles. Her mother had sent her to deliver them to an older widow who lived near the northern edge of the city. The path was quiet, but the spring air felt warm and pleasant. The widow's house sat beside a small patch of wildflowers that had taken root among stones. When Theonia knocked, the door opened with a soft creak. The old woman, whose name was Alkip, smiled gently. "You've come again," she said. "Your mother is kind to send you so often?" Theonia returned the smile. She says you know more about herbs than anyone in the valley. Alkip laughed lightly. I know a few things. Come inside. The house was simple but warm. Clay jars lined one wall, each filled with dried herbs. Pieces of woven fabric hung from another, dyed in muted colours. Theonia set the basket down and began unpacking its contents, placing each bundle with care. Alkip watched her for a moment before saying, You move with careful hands. That is good. Theonia shrugged softly. My mother says that care begins in the hands before it reaches the heart. A wise woman, Alkip replied. For a while they worked together in quiet harmony, sorting herbs, tying fresh bundles, crushing leaves to release their scent. Then Occip spoke again. You are nearly grown. Do you feel it? Theonia hesitated. Sometimes. Sometimes not at all. That is how most feel, Alkip said kindly. Growing happens the way days pass. You do not notice until you look back. Theonia absorbed those words deeply. She felt unsure of the path ahead, but moments like this, steady, gentle, full of quiet understanding, helped her feel less alone. In the fields, Terion and his son Lycos continued their work under the warming sun. Today they were clearing a section of land that had become tangled with early spring weeds. Lycos struggled with the thicker roots, tugging so hard that he fell backward onto the ground. Terion chuckled and offered his hand to help the boy up. You'll win more battles with patience than with force. Lycos dusted himself off. But force feels faster. Terion nodded. Until it fails. The boy sighed, but the lesson settled into him little by little. As they worked, Lycos noticed movement further down the field. A group of Spartan inspectors walking among the helots, observing their work. The boy stiffened slightly, but his father placed a gentle hand on his back. Keep working, he whispered, and breathe. Lycos did as he was told. The inspectors passed without stopping. The moment of tension faded. When they were far enough away, Lycos whispered, I don't like when they watch. No one does, Terion said. But fear does not control us. We keep working. We keep living. That is our strength. The boy nodded. These small lessons shaped him more than he realized. As the sun lowered toward late afternoon, the city shifted again. Traders moved through the streets. Children carried water from communal fountains. Women prepared evening meals. Older men sat near doorways, speaking quietly about land, weather, and memories from wars long past. In the central square, a storyteller, an elderly man named Philemon, sat on a low stone bench, speaking to a group of younger children. He told them a tale about an ancient king who had once protected the valley during a harsh winter. His voice was soft, and the children leaned close to hear his words. Strength, he said in the middle of his tale, is not a single thing. It grows from kindness as much as it grows from courage. The children considered this, their brows furrowed in thought. Even Spartans, raised with stern discipline, found room for quiet truths spoken in gentle tones. As evening settled across the city once more, lamps flickered to life. Families gathered. Conversations softened. The mountains darkened into silhouettes against the fading light. In the barracks, Cleomenes lay awake for a moment, listening to the steady breathing of his companions. He felt tired, but it was a good tired. The kind that came after progress. Across the city, Theonia prepared to sleep, her fingers smelling faintly of herbs. She felt calm, reminded Occip's words. In a humble home near the fields, Lycos curled beside his father, knowing he was safe. Terion whispered a quiet blessing over him, something simple and ancient. And in countless other households, similar moments unfolded, small threads of humanity in a city known for its iron discipline. The night, once again, covered Sparta in stillness, a stillness filled with lives growing, learning, enduring. Imagine walking along narrow streets, the ground worn smooth by countless footsteps over generations. You pass simple stone houses, flat, roofed and low to the ground, where families rise early each day. Smoke drifts from small hearths, carrying the smell of coarse bread and boiling legumes. The city is calm, yet every movement seems purposeful. There is no excess, No display, no unnecessary conversation. In Sparta, everything serves a function. At the center of Spartan life was the agoge, the rigorous training program for boys. From the age of 7, boys were removed from their families to live in communal barracks. This separation was not gentle. It was designed to strip away comfort and dependence, replacing them with endurance, discipline, and a sense of loyalty to the city above all else. Life in the agoge was harsh, and survival required constant attention, effort, and resilience. Each day began early, often before dawn. The boys rose from simple reed mats or straw bedding on hard floors, with no blankets or soft comforts. Their mornings were filled with physical training, running across rough terrain, wrestling in dusty fields, lifting weights, and practicing with wooden weapons. Every movement was observed. Mistakes were corrected with strict discipline. Weakness could not be tolerated, and boys quickly learned that complaining, hesitation, or failure would meet swift correction. Their diet was intentionally sparse, designed to teach endurance and resourcefulness. The infamous Spartan black broth, a thick soup of boiled pig's blood, salt, and vinegar, was meant to temper their appetites and build tolerance to hardship. Bread, barley, cheese, and occasional fruits supplemented the diet, but luxury and abundance were considered dangerous distractions from the pursuit of strength and resilience. Hunger became a tool to train the mind as well as the body, teaching boys to endure discomfort without complaint. Spartan training was not only physical. Boys learned survival skills, including stealth, tracking, and living with minimal resources. They were encouraged to steal food to develop cunning and resourcefulness, but if caught, the punishment was severe. Their education included reading and writing, but primarily as practical skills. Philosophy, poetry, and artistic pursuits were limited, for the Spartans believed that softness could undermine strength. Speech was valued for clarity and brevity, and young men were taught to express themselves succinctly, without unnecessary words or emotion. Meanwhile, the girls of Sparta lived very different, but also disciplined lives. They were not part of the agoge, yet their training was equally focused on strength and endurance. From childhood, girls ran, jumped, wrestled, and practiced athletic skills to prepare for motherhood and household management. Spartan women were expected to be physically strong to bear healthy children and capable of managing estates while men were away at war. Unlike girls in other Greek cities, Spartan women enjoyed relative freedom and social respect, speaking openly and owning property, a stark contrast to their contemporaries elsewhere in Greece. Helots, the enslaved population, formed the backbone of Spartan labor. They tilled fields, cared for livestock, and produced the food that sustained the city. They outnumbered the Spartan citizens, creating a constant tension. Spartans maintained strict control, using fear and oversight to prevent rebellion. Despite this, helots found ways to maintain small joys in their daily lives, family connections, storytelling, and quiet moments of leisure when possible. Yet their existence was never truly secure, always shadowed by the city's strict dominance. As boys grew into adolescence within the agoge, training became more demanding. They learned complex military formations, such as the phalanx, and practiced group maneuvers until each movement became instinctive. Physical endurance continued to be tested through long marches, exposure to harsh weather, and combat drills. Strength was measured not only in muscles, but in the ability to remain calm under fear, to endure pain, and to act decisively in coordinated action with others. Discipline in Sparta was absolute. Every citizen, from the youngest boy to the oldest man, understood that survival depended on unity and obedience. Boys learned that personal fear or hesitation could endanger not only themselves but the group. In this way, courage was cultivated not as a feeling but as a learned, habitual response. Fear was acknowledged, but it was never allowed to dominate. Meals and social life reinforced this sense of discipline. Adult Spartan men ate in communal mess halled syssitia, where shared food symbolized unity and equality. Each man contributed to the group and adhered to strict rules of conduct. Meals were simple and functional, with little indulgence. Conversation was controlled, focusing on matters of duty, strategy, or the well-being of the city. Luxury was scorned, temperance was celebrated. Even the wealthiest citizens were expected to conform to this austere standard. Spartan men spent much of their adult lives in military service. War was not occasional, it was a near, constant presence in culture and expectation. Military campaigns demanded physical endurance, strategic skill, and the ability to work seamlessly with comrades. Soldiers were trained to remain in formation despite wounds, hunger, or fatigue, and to obey orders without hesitation. Courage was not romanticized. It was practical, essential, and tested repeatedly. Women, during these campaigns, maintained households and estates. They oversaw helots, managed property, and ensured their families remained secure. In a sense, Spartan women were the guardians of stability, responsible for the continuity of the city in the absence of men. Their lives, though less celebrated in histories of war, were essential to the functioning of Sparta, and they held more authority and independence than women in most other Greek cities. Even everyday life was permeated by the principles of survival and vigilance. Spartans moved with measured steps. Speech was deliberate. Habits, routines, and training governed each hour. Leisure existed, but rarely without purpose. Dancing, music, or poetry might be included, but always with moderation, often as part of education or ceremony. Luxury or idleness was considered a threat to the city's stability. A harsh reality persisted in every aspect of Spartan life. Weakness was not tolerated, comfort was minimized, and fear was a constant companion. From childhood, the awareness of danger, both in the form of enemy armies and internal uprisings of helots, shaped behavior and expectations. Children grew up learning to endure pain, control emotion, and prioritize the city above personal needs. Their identity was inseparable from the collective. Yet beneath the discipline, life had moments of quiet humanity. Boys whispered to one another in the barracks. Girls laughed while training or working. Families shared meals and small joys. Even helots found ways to preserve stories, songs, and bonds within their limited freedom. These moments offered brief reprieve from the unyielding demands of Spartan culture, grounding people in human experience amidst the rigor. The full weight of Spartan life, however, became clear in adulthood. Men continued military service for decades, often leaving home for long periods. Their lives were structured around readiness, strategy, and defense. The phalanx, the shield wall, and the spear formations that had been drilled since childhood became their reality. Fear, pain, hunger, and exhaustion were constant companions, but they were endured in the name of duty, honor, and survival. Women oversaw households with strict expectation, training children, managing labor, and ensuring the estate's security. The responsibilities of motherhood, estate management, and instruction were relentless, yet necessary for the survival of the city. Every action, every choice, was tied to Sparta's continuity. Helots labored constantly, aware that the consequences of failure could be deadly. Their existence was precarious, structured entirely around the needs of the city. Yet they persevered, finding small joys where they could, tending family, tending fields, and preserving a culture beneath the surface of oppression. Even leisure and festivals were tempered by the city's values. Religious observances, dance, and communal meals reinforced unity and discipline rather than indulgence. Spartans celebrated events with purpose, never with excess. The focus remained on collective identity, survival, and readiness. In this way, the harsh reality of life in Sparta was both constant and total. Every citizen, male or female, child or adult, lived within a framework that demanded endurance, self-control, and loyalty to the city above all else. Comfort, safety, and personal preference were secondary. Yet through this extreme rigor, Spartans developed unparalleled cohesion, physical strength, and societal stability. The city endured because it demanded everything of its people. Fear was acknowledged but controlled. Pain was present but overcome. Hunger, exposure, and exhaustion were part of education. Discipline formed the foundation of every action, and through these relentless structures, the Spartan way of life persisted for generations, shaping a society unlike any other in ancient Greece. And now, as night settles, the quiet hum of Sparta emerges, the steady breathing of those asleep in barracks, the faint sound of women tending homes, the distant rustle of helots returning from the fields. Life is strict, unyielding, and demanding, but it is also a life of quiet purpose, of deep connections to community, and of unbroken continuity through centuries. Sparta was that city, and its way of life was designed to produce strength, endurance, and unflinching loyalty. But this strength came at a cost. Life in Sparta was hard, physically, mentally, and socially. From the very beginning, Spartan life emphasized harshness. Boys were taken from their families at the age of 7 to enter the agoge, the state-run education and training system. This was not a gentle schooling. The agoge was rigorous, designed to strip away comfort and teach endurance. Children slept on hard floors with minimal bedding, were given little clothing, and often went barefoot. They were intentionally subjected to hunger and discomfort to prepare them for the hardships of war and survival. Weakness was not tolerated, and the threat of punishment or public humiliation was constant. The city expected them to learn that comfort was unnecessary and that resilience was everything. Daily life in the agoge combined physical, military, and social training. Boys ran long distances across rocky terrain, wrestled each other until exhaustion, lifted heavy objects, and practiced with wooden weapons. Every movement was observed by older mentors or the city's overseers, who corrected mistakes sharply. Even small errors could lead to severe consequences. Children were taught not to whine, not to complain, and not to show fear. Strength and endurance were measured not only in the ability to lift, strike, or run, but in the ability to remain calm under discomfort, to follow orders precisely, and to act in coordination with others. Hunger was a constant part of Spartan life. Boys were given minimal rations to encourage resourcefulness. They were often encouraged to steal food from helots to supplement their diet, but being caught resulted in harsh punishment. This practice taught cunning and self-reliance, but it also instilled the constant awareness that danger lurked everywhere, even in small, everyday actions. As they grew older, boys' training intensified. Adolescents learned to fight in phalanx formations, mastering the precise movements necessary for group combat. This was exhausting both physically and mentally. Soldiers were drilled to endure extreme weather, to march long distances without rest, and to maintain formation even when tired, hungry, or injured. The training instilled discipline but also constant pressure. Every failure carried consequences, and every success was merely preparation for the next, even harsher challenge. Spartan girls also faced demanding lives, though in different ways. They were expected to run, wrestle, and develop physical strength to prepare for childbirth and management of households. Their training ensured that future Spartan mothers could bear healthy children and oversee estates while men were away at war. The rigorous expectations for girls also carried social pressure. They were responsible for raising children who could survive Spartan standards and managing homes in a society where failure could bring shame. The social system itself contributed to the harshness of Spartan life. Society was divided into three main groups: Spartiates, the full citizens and soldiers, perikoi, free residents who were craftsmen and traders, and helots, the enslaved agricultural population. The Spartiates were expected to focus solely on military excellence and leadership, while helots produced the food and labor that allowed Spartans to maintain this focus. Helots outnumbered the Spartan citizens, creating constant tension. Spartans lived with the fear of rebellion. They were trained from childhood to be alert, aware, and capable of defending themselves and the city against internal threats, as well as external enemies. Even daily meals reinforced the austerity of Spartan life. The famous black broth, a mixture of pig's blood, salt and vinegar, was intentionally unpalatable, designed to teach toughness and discourage indulgence. Meals were simple and functional, often consisting of barley, cheese, or occasional vegetables. Luxury was discouraged because it could soften the mind and body, making soldiers less capable of enduring hardship. Citizens ate together in syssitia, communal mess halls, reinforcing equality and unity while also reminding everyone that survival depended on cooperation and discipline. Punishments for failure, disobedience, or weakness were strict. Boys could be beaten for breaking rules. Soldiers who performed poorly might face humiliation or additional physical drills. Helots faced even harsher treatment. Minor infractions could lead to severe punishment or execution. The city was structured to reinforce fear and compliance as tools for survival. This constant vigilance, coupled with rigorous training, created a life of tension where mistakes carried significant consequences. Psychological pressure was also part of the harshness. From childhood, Spartans were taught to suppress personal feelings in favor of the collective good. Fear was acknowledged but never expressed. Weakness was hidden, for exposure could lead to punishment or loss of status. Boys learned to endure not only physical pain but also emotional strain. Life was a test of endurance in every dimension. Even after completing the agoge and becoming adult soldiers, the demands did not lessen. Spartan men spent decades in military service, constantly training, standing watch, and preparing for war. They were expected to maintain perfect discipline in all situations, to uphold the reputation of the city, and to act without hesitation. Their entire identity was defined by their role as warriors, leaving little room for personal freedom or leisurely pursuits. Women, while not soldiers, were expected to maintain households, manage estates, and raise children according to the city's strict values. Their lives were also harsh in that they carried immense responsibility without public recognition. They needed to maintain strength, resilience, and discipline to ensure that the next generation of Spartans could survive. The helots, meanwhile, lived under almost unbearable hardship. They were forced to work the land, feed the population, and remain submissive. Their labor was essential, yet their lives were always under threat. Spartans could kill helots without consequence, and rebellions were brutally suppressed. Every aspect of helot life was shaped by fear, and this tension contributed indirectly to the harshness experienced by Spartan citizens, who constantly trained and lived in awareness of the potential for internal revolt. Even in times of peace, Spartan life was demanding. The city celebrated few festivals and allowed minimal leisure. Art, literature, and philosophy were largely secondary to training, labor, and military preparation. Every day was purposeful. Every action was linked to survival, defense, or the cultivation of strength. Comfort, ease, or indulgence were avoided because they were seen as threats to the discipline upon which Spartan society depended. Thus, the harshness of Spartan life was total. Children were removed from family comfort, subjected to hunger, physical punishment, and relentless training. Adolescents endured both physical and psychological strain to prepare for lifelong military service. Adults faced decades of rigid routine, discipline, and responsibility. Women managed households, estates, and children under pressure. Helots lived lives of near, constant labor and fear. This society, though harsh, produced remarkable endurance, cohesion, and military prowess. Every Spartan was conditioned to face pain, hunger, fear, and responsibility without complaint. Life was difficult, sometimes cruel, and always demanding, but it shaped a culture renowned for its strength and unity. Even as the sun set over the valley, the echoes of this rigor persisted. Boys returned to barracks, girls to homes, men to dining halls, and helots to fields. Every life in Sparta moved within the framework of discipline and duty. Comfort was rare, fear was constant, endurance was expected, and through it all, Sparta endured. In this way, we can understand why living in ancient Sparta was harsh. It was a society built on control, discipline, and survival. Physical pain, psychological strain, social pressure, and the constant threat of failure were woven into every aspect of daily life. It was a world that demanded everything from every person, and in return, it produced a city that could endure centuries of warfare and hardship. The harshness of life in Sparta began at birth. Spartan infants were carefully examined by elders shortly after delivery. Weak or deformed babies were often abandoned on a hillside, left to die, because the city valued strength above all else. This practice was designed to ensure that only the physically fit survived, and it instilled an understanding from birth that weakness was not acceptable. Parents lived with this brutal reality as part of daily life, understanding that their children's survival depended on meeting the city's rigid standards. Once children survived early infancy, their lives were shaped by discipline, endurance, and control. Boys were separated from their families at the age of 7 and entered the agoge, a state-run educational and military training system. The agoge was not a school in the modern sense. It was a harsh, demanding environment designed to teach boys how to endure pain, hunger, fear, and exhaustion. They slept on straw mats or bare floors with minimal clothing, often going barefoot. Warmth, comfort, and luxury were considered weaknesses. The daily routines of boys in the agoge were relentless. Each morning began with physical training, long runs across rocky terrain, exercises in balance, lifting weights, and wrestling until muscles ached. Discipline was strict. Mentors and overseers observed every movement, correcting mistakes immediately, often with physical punishment. The boys learned to obey orders without hesitation. Fear, fatigue, and pain were constant companions. By the time they were adolescents, boys could endure long marches, harsh weather, and physical duress without complaint. Hunger was another tool used to shape Spartan children. Rations were intentionally small, designed to encourage self-reliance and resourcefulness. Boys were sometimes encouraged to steal food from helots to supplement their diet. Being caught was dangerous, yet the act of stealth taught cunning and problem-solving. Hunger, combined with punishment, created a mental resilience that was considered essential for the hardships of soldiering. Education in Sparta was focused on military preparation and practical skills rather than intellectual exploration. Reading and writing were taught, but mostly for administrative and practical purposes. Philosophy, poetry, and art were largely secondary, sometimes even discouraged. Speech was taught to be concise and direct, with little room for expression of emotion. Boys were trained to act decisively, to remain calm in fear, and to endure suffering without complaint. Weakness of body or mind was seen as a threat not only to the individual, but to the entire city-state. Girls, while not enrolled in the agoge, were also subjected to rigorous expectations. From childhood, they trained physically through running, wrestling, and other exercises designed to develop strength and endurance. The aim was practical. Spartan women were expected to bear strong, healthy children and manage households while men were away at war. Their education focused on physical fitness, household management, and social responsibility. Unlike women in other Greek cities, Spartan women enjoyed relative freedom and respect, but their lives were far from easy. Their strength and independence were demanded, not optional. The social structure of Sparta intensified the harshness of life. Spartan citizens, known as Spartiates, were the military elite. They devoted their lives entirely to military service and governance. Below them were the Periikoi, free residents who handled trade and craft but had no political power. At the bottom were the helots, the enslaved population that farmed the land and performed labor. Helots outnumbered Spartiate citizens, which created a persistent fear of rebellion. Spartan citizens were constantly trained and alert, aware that the city's survival depended not only on defending against outside enemies, but also on controlling internal threats. Even the diet of Spartans reflected their harsh way of life. Meals were simple and austere. The famous black broth, a mixture of pig's blood, salt and vinegar, was deliberately unpalatable, designed to toughen soldiers and teach endurance. Bread, barley, olives, cheese, and occasional vegetables supplemented the diet. Luxury or indulgence was seen as weakening. Meals were often eaten in communal dining halls. Syssitia, which reinforced equality and unity, reminding everyone that survival depended on cooperation and discipline. Punishments were strict and immediate. In the agoge, boys could be beaten for disobedience or failure. Mistakes were not tolerated. Adults were held to similar standards. Soldiers who failed to meet expectations in drills or in battle could face public shame or additional punishment. Helots faced even harsher realities. Minor offences could result in death as the city used terror to maintain control over this vast enslaved population. The military expectations of Spartan men were relentless. Even after leaving the agoge, men were expected to continue training daily, participate in military campaigns, and maintain physical fitness throughout adulthood. Soldiers were drilled to endure extreme hunger, exhaustion, and pain without complaint. Courage was measured not as a feeling, but as a learned habit, reinforced repeatedly through experience. The Spartans believed that only through such constant testing could a soldier remain reliable in the chaos of battle. Women, while not soldiers, faced their own demanding expectations. They managed households, estates, and children, ensuring that the next generation of Spartan citizens could survive the rigorous standards of the city. Women trained physically to maintain their health and strength, preparing to give birth and raise children who could withstand Spartan society. Their independence came with constant responsibility. Failure to manage a household or raise strong children could bring shame, social scrutiny, or even danger. Helots, the enslaved population, endured the harshest conditions. They were forced to farm, care for livestock, and provide the labor that allowed Spartiates to focus on military training. Helots lived under constant threat. Spartan citizens could punish or kill them at any time. Rebellion was suppressed with extreme violence. Their lives were designed to be one of submission and endurance. And yet, despite the oppression, they maintained quiet forms of community and culture, preserving family bonds and stories beneath the surface of control. Even everyday life outside of training and labor was difficult. Leisure was minimal. Spartans participated in festivals and religious observances, but these were structured and purposeful rather than indulgent. Art, poetry, and philosophy were secondary to survival, discipline, and readiness for combat. The city valued temperance, self-control, and minimalism. Comfort or luxury was considered a threat to the development of resilience and unity. The psychological pressures were significant. From childhood, Spartans were taught to suppress personal emotion and prioritize the city above individual desires. Fear, pain, and fatigue were constant companions, but public display of weakness was unacceptable. Boys learned to endure both physical and emotional challenges without complaint. Men were expected to remain calm and disciplined, even under extreme stress or danger. Women were expected to be strong and responsible, regardless of hardship. Helots lived in fear of punishment or death. In essence, Spartan life was harsh because it demanded constant physical endurance, mental resilience, social discipline, and obedience. Weakness was punished, comfort was avoided, and survival required cooperation, vigilance, and relentless self-control. Every aspect of life, from birth to adulthood, from food to training, from social roles to daily routines, was designed to shape people into strong, disciplined citizens and soldiers. The result of this harsh system was a society with remarkable cohesion and military strength. Spartans could endure hunger, pain, and fear that would overwhelm others. They moved as a unit, thought as a unit, and lived for the survival of the city above all else. Yet this came at the cost of personal comfort, freedom, and emotional expression. Life was relentless. Even as night fell over Sparta, the city rested in readiness. Soldiers slept lightly, always alert to danger. Girls and women maintained their households and prepared for the next day. Helots tended their fields until dusk, returning to meager homes. Every life in Sparta was shaped by discipline, fear, and endurance. A constant balancing act between survival, duty, and societal expectation. This is why life in Sparta was harsh. Every day required endurance. Every meal was a lesson in discipline. Every moment carried expectation and consequence. The city demanded everything from every person, and in return, it produced a society capable of unparalleled strength, cohesion, and survival in a dangerous world. Imagine the early morning air of Sparta, crisp and faintly earthy. The sun has not yet fully risen, but already life stirs in the stone streets, the barracks, and the fields. Sparta is a city where every day is shaped by discipline, endurance, and preparation for survival. From the youngest child to the eldest citizen, every life is connected to the demands of the state, the expectations of society, and the constant presence of fear and duty. The day in Sparta begins long before most other cities would stir. Boys in the agoge rise before dawn. Their sleeping mats are thin and coarse, placed on hard floors with no blankets or comfort. The temperature in winter is biting, and they are expected to endure it, learning early that survival does not depend on warmth or ease. As the boys dress, their garments are simple tunics, often worn thin and worn from use. Shoes are rare, many walk barefoot to toughen their feet and increase their resilience. The first hours of the day are devoted to physical endurance. Boys run across rocky hills, sand, and dirt paths. Their steps are measured, their bodies pushed beyond comfort. Wrestling matches and sparring drills test strength, agility, and strategic thinking. Older boys observe and correct younger ones with precision, and mistakes are punished through both reprimand and physical correction. A missed grip, a stumble, or hesitation is not merely a flaw. It is a failure that could endanger the group in future battles. The emphasis on collective responsibility begins early, teaching that one individual's weakness can affect the entire community. After the initial training, boys often practice stealth and survival exercises. They are sent into nearby forests or fields with minimal food, forced to hunt small animals or forage for edible plants. They are sometimes encouraged to steal food from helots to develop cunning. Yet if caught, the punishment is swift and harsh. This dual pressure of hunger and the risk of punishment instills resourcefulness, but also constant awareness of danger. Meals themselves are austere and purposeful. Boys in the agoge eat simple rations, often bread, cheese, and occasionally fruit or vegetables. Meat is rare. The famous black broth, a bitter mixture of pig's blood, salt, and vinegar, is served to older adolescents and adult soldiers to toughen the body and mind. Every bite is a lesson in endurance. It is meant to challenge taste, test willingness, and cultivate tolerance to discomfort. Luxury is shunned because it weakens resilience. Eating is not a pleasure, it is a practice in restraint. Beyond physical training, Spartan boys learn discipline and social order. They are taught to obey commands instantly, to speak only when necessary, and to maintain composure at all times. Emotional expression is discouraged. Fear, sorrow, or hesitation must be hidden. Boys are expected to endure insults, peer pressure, and public humiliation without complaint. Every day, they are reminded that life in Sparta demands strength not only of body, but also of mind and character. Adolescence brings increased rigor. Boys learn complex military tactics, including formation fighting and phalanx maneuvers. Long marches, weapon drills, and mock battles consume hours, and failure results in correction. They learn to fight in precise synchronization, understanding that survival in real combat depends on discipline, cohesion, and endurance. Pain, fatigue, and hunger are constant, yet soldiers must act with calm and decisiveness. Weakness is not allowed. Girls in Sparta also face demanding lives. From early childhood they practice physical exercises designed to build strength and endurance. Running, jumping, and wrestling are standard. The aim is to produce women capable of bearing strong children, maintaining health, and managing households while men serve in military campaigns. Their training is rigorous, yet unlike boys, it is intertwined with social responsibilities. Education in household management, childcare, and social duties ensures that Spartan society continues through the next generation. Women, therefore, carry responsibility for both physical and social stability. The social hierarchy amplifies the harshness. Full citizens, the Spartiates, dedicate themselves entirely to military service. They own little property and rely on the labor of helots for food and support. The perioikoi, free residents, handle trade and craft, yet remain politically subordinate. The helots, who vastly outnumber Spartiate citizens, farm the land and produce the sustenance that allows Sparta to function. The constant threat of helot revolt keeps citizens vigilant. This fear shapes daily life. Every citizen knows that a lapse in attention could allow rebellion to grow, and the state trains them accordingly from childhood to adulthood. Helots themselves endure extreme hardship. They are forced to work long hours in the fields, often under harsh supervision. Spartan citizens may punish or kill helots arbitrarily, maintaining social control through terror. Families live under constant threat. Despite this oppression, helots develop quiet forms of community, preserving family bonds, knowledge, and culture in the margins. Even in submission, life is a struggle for survival. For adult men, life is equally harsh. Military service continues for decades. Soldiers train daily, march in formations, and participate in campaigns, sometimes far from home for months or years. The city expects unwavering loyalty, obedience, and courage. A Spartan man's reputation rests entirely on his physical ability, endurance, and courage under pressure. Every action, from combat to daily duties, is measured against these standards. Even domestic life is demanding. Spartan women manage households, supervise labor, and ensure the well-being of children. They must raise strong, healthy offspring capable of surviving the agoge and contributing to the city's defense. Women are strong by necessity, exercising authority within households and training their daughters for the same endurance expected of them. Though they enjoy more freedom than women in other Greek cities, their lives remain structured by duty, responsibility, and constant vigilance. The punishments in Spartan society reinforce harshness. Children may be beaten for mistakes, adolescents may endure additional drills for poor performance, and soldiers face public humiliation for failure. Helots live under extreme threat, subject to execution for minor perceived offenses. Fear is omnipresent. Every Spartan grows up understanding that personal failure can have consequences not only for themselves but also for the safety and reputation of the city. Even leisure is structured. Festivals, religious ceremonies, and celebrations exist, but they emphasize unity, ritual, and discipline rather than indulgence. Music, dance, and performance are practiced with moderation, often as a form of social or military education. Luxury and idleness are scorned. Every action reinforces the central values of endurance, discipline, and loyalty. The psychological pressures are constant. Spartans are taught to suppress emotions, endure discomfort, and prioritize the collective above personal desire. Weakness, whether physical or mental, is unacceptable. Boys, men, women, and even children are conditioned to handle fear, pain, and hunger as part of everyday life. Vigilance, awareness of danger, and readiness for combat or punishment are expected at all times. Life is a test of endurance, mental fortitude, and submission to societal expectations. Even small aspects of daily life reflect harshness. Sleep is often minimal and uncomfortable. Clothing is simple, often inadequate, for cold weather. Meals are functional rather than nourishing or pleasurable. Work, training, and responsibility dominate daily existence. Comfort and ease are deliberately minimized, for the city believes that hardship produces strength and survival. In Sparta, the harshness of life shapes the entire city. Boys grow into disciplined soldiers, women develop physical and mental strength. Helots endure labor under constant supervision. Citizens remain alert to threats, whether external or internal. Social cohesion is maintained through fear, discipline, and shared hardship. Personal desire, luxury, or indulgence are secondary to the survival of the city. Even as night falls, the rigor continues. Soldiers may sleep lightly, alert to danger. Women manage households quietly, ensuring that the next day begins smoothly. Helots return to minimal rest before labor begins again. Every hour of every life is framed by endurance, responsibility, and survival. Spartan life is harsh because it demands constant physical, mental, and social vigilance. Every day tests strength, courage, and resilience. Weakness is punished, comfort is denied, survival, discipline, and loyalty define every action. The city shapes people entirely for endurance and cohesion. It is a society of unrelenting expectations, fear, and training. Yet through this harshness, Sparta creates a people capable of extraordinary resilience, unity, and martial skill. A culture unmatched in its focus on survival, strength, and societal stability. Even in silence, one can sense the city's rigor, the steady breathing of sleeping boys in barracks, the quiet care of women tending households, the distant footsteps of helots moving under supervision. Every life moves according to the same principles: discipline, endurance, fear, and duty. And it is precisely this rigorous, unyielding structure that defines the harsh reality of life in ancient Sparta. Imagine the morning mist over Sparta as the first light brushes across the stone streets, the training grounds, and the terraced hills where the city meets the countryside. Life here is demanding. From the moment a Spartan child opens their eyes, the day is structured to teach endurance, discipline, and survival. Every hour, every task, every expectation reinforces the city's unwavering focus on strength and cohesion. The day begins long before dawn. Boys in the agoge, from the age of 7, rise from their straw mats on the cold floors of communal barracks. Sleep is minimal and comfort is denied. Even in winter, many go barefoot, wearing only a thin tunic. The cold, the hard floor, and the simple surroundings are deliberate. They are early lessons in endurance and self-reliance. The first activity is usually a long run across uneven terrain, often hills or rocky fields. Boys are pushed to run without complaint, learning that fatigue is not an excuse for slowing down. After running, they engage in strength exercises, lifting stones or wooden weights, wrestling with peers, or practicing strikes with wooden swords and shields. Every movement is observed by older boys or agoge instructors, who correct mistakes immediately. A poor grip, an imbalance, or hesitation might be met with punishment. Discipline is absolute. Boys are taught that weakness, even in small moments, can have consequences, not just for themselves, but for the collective. Following physical exercises, the boys practice combat drills. They learn to move in formation, synchronize strikes with others, and endure prolonged periods of physical stress. Sparring matches are often conducted in harsh conditions, without water or rest breaks. Boys experience hunger, fatigue, and discomfort daily. These exercises are meant to simulate real battlefield conditions, teaching them endurance, composure under pressure, and the instinct to act without hesitation. Breakfast, when it comes, is minimal. Often it consists of bread, barley porridge, cheese, and occasionally a few vegetables. Meat is rare. The infamous black broth, a mixture of pig's blood, salt, and vinegar, is served to older adolescents and adult soldiers to cultivate resilience and tolerance to unpleasant conditions. Eating is not pleasurable. It is a training exercise. Every meal teaches discipline and moderation, reinforcing that indulgence is a threat to survival. Education in the agoge is practical and military-focused. Boys are taught reading and writing, but primarily for administrative and logistical purposes. Philosophy, poetry, and abstract arts are largely absent as the city prioritizes skills directly useful for survival and warfare. Boys also learn stealth, tracking, and survival skills. They may be sent out with minimal food to find or steal sustenance, a practice that teaches cunning, resourcefulness, and endurance. Being caught in theft, however, brings punishment. Adolescents face increased physical and social pressure. Training becomes more intense. Long marches, mock battles, and combat drills dominate their daily lives. Pain, hunger, and fatigue are constant. Instructors monitor each student closely. Boys are corrected, disciplined, or humiliated if they fail to meet expectations. Through repetition and exposure to hardship, endurance becomes habitual, ingrained in body and mind. Fear and pain are acknowledged but suppressed, forming part of the Spartan ethos. Spartan girls, while not part of the agoge, also lead demanding lives. Physical training begins in childhood and continues into adulthood. Girls run, jump, and wrestle, strengthening their bodies for childbirth and household management. They are expected to maintain physical health, oversee estates, and raise children capable of enduring the agoge themselves. While Spartan women enjoy greater social independence than women in other Greek city-states, their lives are far from easy. Responsibility and resilience are constant expectations. The social structure of Sparta intensifies this harshness. Full citizens or Spartiates dedicate their lives to military training and governance. They own little land and rely on helots, the enslaved population, to provide food and labor. The perioikoi, free non-citizens, manage trade and craft work but have limited political influence. Helots vastly outnumber Spartiates, creating a constant undercurrent of fear. Citizens train continuously, not only for external warfare, but also to maintain control over internal threats. Vigilance, discipline, and readiness are inseparable from daily life. Helots endure extreme hardship. They farm the land, care for livestock, and perform labor that sustains the city. They live under constant threat of punishment, violence, and even death. Spartan citizens are taught to maintain absolute control over them. Yet helots often form tight, knit communities, preserving traditions, family bonds, and quiet cultural practices beneath the watchful eyes of their masters. Life for helots is a constant exercise in endurance, obedience, and survival. Adult men, once fully trained, continue the rigorous routines of Spartan life. Military drills remain daily. Marching, weapon practice, and formation exercises continue for decades. Soldiers participate in campaigns, sometimes far from home, enduring hunger, thirst, and exposure. Obedience, courage, and cohesion are required at all times. The success of the city depends on every soldier meeting these expectations. Weakness, failure, or hesitation is not tolerated. Women maintain households and estates during these campaigns, ensuring the city continues to function. They are responsible for raising strong children, supervising helots, and managing domestic and economic affairs. Their physical and social strength is critical. While they have freedoms unavailable in other Greek city-states, these freedoms are coupled with relentless responsibility. Failure is socially and economically costly. Punishments are severe and frequent. In the agoge, boys may be beaten for disobedience or failure. Adolescents endure added drills or public humiliation. Adult soldiers may face similar consequences for poor performance. Helots live under constant threat. Even minor infractions can lead to execution. Fear and discipline are tools of survival in Spartan society. The omnipresent threat of punishment ensures conformity, cohesion, and the relentless pursuit of strength. The psychological demands of Spartan life are profound. Citizens are trained to suppress emotion, control fear, and prioritize the city above individual desires. Boys learn to endure pain without complaint. Men maintain composure under extreme stress or danger. Women oversee households and train children with discipline. Helots labor under constant supervision, always aware of potential consequences. Emotional suppression, endurance of discomfort, and vigilance become part of daily life. Even small aspects of Spartan life reinforce discipline and harshness. Sleep is often minimal and on hard surfaces. Clothing is simple and inadequate for some seasons. Meals are functional rather than pleasurable. Every hour of life, training, labor, or domestic responsibility reinforces the city's values. Comfort and ease are deliberately minimized to cultivate resilience and strength. The military ethos pervades every aspect of Spartan culture. Soldiers are trained for combat, vigilance, and endurance, and this begins in childhood. Daily routines reinforce collective responsibility, the importance of discipline, and the consequences of weakness. Spartan warriors are expected to fight with courage, maintain cohesion in formation, and survive in extreme conditions. Military success and survival of the city depend entirely on these skills, reinforced day after day through intense training and strict social expectation. Even festivals and religious observances are structured to reinforce these values. While celebrations occur, they are disciplined, purposeful, and communal. Music, dance, and poetry exist but primarily serve educational or ritualistic purposes. Luxury, idleness, and indulgence are actively discouraged. Life in Sparta is shaped by endurance, duty, and collective cohesion rather than individual pleasure. Diet continues to reinforce resilience. Meals are intentionally simple, designed to prevent softness. Hunger, scarcity, and unpalatable foods teach self-restraint and fortitude. Every meal is an exercise in training, not enjoyment. Boys and men learn to eat quickly, efficiently, and without complaint. This cultivation of endurance applies equally to physical and mental challenges. The harshness of Spartan society reaches into every household. Children grow up under constant observation and discipline. Boys are trained in the agoge to endure hunger, cold, and fatigue. Girls are trained to be physically and socially capable, preparing households and future generations. Helots labor relentlessly. Men endure decades of military service. Women maintain estates. Fear, vigilance, and discipline permeate daily life. Comfort is rare. Survival and strength are paramount. Even moments of rest are fleeting. Soldiers may sleep lightly, alert to danger. Women maintain routines of household management. Helots work and rest under supervision. Every day reinforces endurance, responsibility, and societal expectation. Life is demanding, relentless, and unyielding, yet this harshness produces remarkable cohesion, strength, and resilience. Spartan citizens are capable of withstanding physical, social, and psychological challenges unmatched by most other societies. The reality of life in Sparta is one of constant challenge. Hunger, pain, fear, exhaustion, and strict social expectation shape every moment. Weakness is punished. Comfort is denied. Individual desires are secondary to the survival of the city. Daily life is a continuous cycle of endurance, discipline, and vigilance. This is why Sparta endured as a city-state and produced one of the most formidable military cultures in history. Even as darkness falls, the rigor persists. Soldiers sleep lightly, always prepared. Women oversee households and ensure continuity. Helots tend fields, prepare meals, and maintain minimal rest. Every life moves in rhythm with endurance, duty, and survival. Fear, discipline, and expectation guide each moment. Life is harsh, relentless, and uncompromising. But it is the harshness itself that defines the strength, cohesion, and endurance of Spartan society. From the moment the first light of dawn touched the stone streets of Sparta, the city moved with purpose and precision. Boys in the agoge were already awake, stretching their stiff limbs on the cold floors of the communal barracks. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of earth and smoke from distant hearths, and yet comfort was nowhere to be found. They rose without hesitation, understanding that delay or complaint would be seen as weakness. Their first task was always physical, and rigor marked every movement. The morning began with running over uneven terrain. Rocky hills, sparse fields, and dusty paths tested not only endurance but balance and coordination. Falling or stumbling was not merely an accident. It was a lesson, reinforced by correction from older boys or instructors. Wrestling matches followed, designed to cultivate strength, agility, and strategic thinking. Pain was constant, and the boys learned to endure it silently, to move fluidly despite exhaustion, and to act decisively in every engagement. After physical exercises, the boys engaged in practical survival training. They were sent into nearby woods with minimal supplies, forced to forage or hunt small game, sometimes encouraged to steal from helots. Success required cunning, speed, and stealth, while failure brought punishment. These exercises instilled resourcefulness and awareness, teaching that danger could come from any direction, and survival demanded constant vigilance. Hunger and discomfort were deliberate tools, conditioning young minds and bodies to operate under scarcity. Meals were simple and austere. Bread, barley, cheese, and occasional vegetables provided sustenance, while the bitter black broth was reserved for older adolescents. Eating was never indulgent, it was functional, a continuation of training. Boys learned to eat efficiently, tolerate unpleasant flavors, and maintain composure even when hunger gnawed sharply. Every meal reinforced the principle that endurance and self-control were more valuable than pleasure. The educational aspects of the agoge were practical and oriented toward the necessities of Spartan life. Reading and writing were taught primarily for administrative purposes. Philosophy, abstract thought, and artistic pursuits were discouraged, seen as distractions from the cultivation of strength and duty. Boys were instructed in group tactics, discipline, and obedience, with the understanding that every failure reflected upon the collective. Emotional expression was minimized. Fear, sorrow, or hesitation were not publicly acknowledged. As boys matured, the training became more demanding. Adolescents learned to march in formation, to maintain precise spacing in mock battles, and to endure extreme physical and mental fatigue. Their bodies were tested, and their minds were conditioned to act without hesitation under pressure. Failure was met with harsh discipline, reinforcing the connection between individual performance and the survival of the group. Physical endurance, mental resilience, and social conformity were inseparable. Girls were subjected to their own form of rigorous training. Athletic exercises, including running, wrestling, and strength building, prepared them for childbirth and household management. Their education included supervision of estates and instruction in raising strong children, reinforcing the continuity of Spartan society. While Spartan women had greater social independence than women in most other Greek city-states, this independence was paired with strict responsibility and constant expectation. The social structure of Sparta intensified the harshness of daily life. Spartiates devoted themselves entirely to military service, leaving agricultural and domestic labor to helots. The perioikoi handled trade and craftsmanship, but had limited political influence. Helots, who far outnumbered citizens, were forced to toil in fields, tend livestock, and maintain the food supply. Spartan citizens maintained constant vigilance to prevent rebellion, and fear of uprising was an undercurrent in every interaction with the helot population. Punishments for transgressions were immediate and severe. Boys could be beaten for mistakes in training. Adolescents might endure public humiliation or additional drills. Adult soldiers faced correction or public disgrace if they failed to meet expectations in combat or in drills. Helots were subjected to extreme measures. Even minor infractions could lead to execution. The threat of punishment shaped every action, enforcing conformity and obedience while cultivating psychological resilience. The life of a Spartan adult male revolved around military readiness. Even outside of campaigns, soldiers trained daily, maintaining peak physical fitness, practicing formations, and performing weapon drills. They marched long distances with full gear, often in harsh weather, building endurance and familiarity with the conditions of battle. The city depended on each soldier's unwavering loyalty, courage, and capacity to endure hardship without complaint. Women maintained households and estates with precision. Their responsibilities extended beyond childcare and property management to include oversight of helots and preparation of the next generation of citizens. They trained physically to ensure health and strength, contributing directly to the stability and continuity of the city. Their lives, while autonomous in comparison to women elsewhere in Greece, were marked by constant vigilance and responsibility. Even ordinary life in Sparta was permeated by discipline. Comfort was minimal and leisure was carefully controlled. Clothing was simple, often inadequate for extreme temperatures. Meals were functional, not pleasurable. Sleep was sparse, and rest was always measured against the needs of training or duty. Every activity, labor, training, domestic management, served the purpose of maintaining endurance, social cohesion, and military readiness. Religious and social rituals reinforced Spartan discipline and hierarchy. Festivals, dances, and communal ceremonies were structured to emphasize unity, obedience, and physical prowess. Music and dance were performed with moderation and purpose. Excess indulgence or idleness was considered dangerous, as it could undermine the focus, strength, and cohesion of the city. The constant psychological pressure of Spartan life cannot be overstated. Boys learned to suppress personal feelings and endure hardship silently. Men maintained composure under extreme stress, whether in training, governance, or combat. Women managed households and estates while training children to meet societal standards. Helots operated under the constant threat of punishment. Every person in Sparta was conditioned to endure fear, hunger, pain, and social expectation as part of daily existence. Dietary austerity reinforced resilience. Minimal rations, bitter foods, and deliberate scarcity trained citizens to tolerate discomfort and suppress indulgence. Each meal was a practical lesson in self-control, teaching that survival required discipline rather than desire. The cultivation of endurance through diet, exercise, and social expectation permeated all aspects of Spartan life. From dawn to dusk, every action in Sparta reinforced the harshness of existence. Boys trained, girls practiced, men drilled, women managed households, and helots labored under supervision. Fear, discipline, and expectation shaped each movement, thought, and decision. Physical endurance, mental resilience, and social conformity were inseparable from daily life. Even in the quiet hours of night, the rigor persisted. Soldiers rested lightly, always alert. Women ensured the household and estates were ready for the next day. Helots performed minimal maintenance work and prepared for early morning labor. Sleep was functional, not indulgent. Every hour reinforced the principles of endurance, discipline, and survival. The harsh reality of Sparta produced a society with unmatched cohesion and martial prowess. Citizens were trained to withstand hunger, pain, exhaustion, and fear. They acted in coordination, maintained discipline, and prioritized the city above personal desire. Women contributed physical strength, social stability, and child-rearing excellence. Helots endured labor and oppression while sustaining the city's needs. Every individual, from childhood through old age, experienced relentless pressure, minimal comfort, and constant expectation. This pressure shaped a people capable of extraordinary resilience. Spartan soldiers could endure conditions that would overwhelm most others. Women maintained physical strength and social authority. Helots developed quiet resilience under oppression. Even childhood was a continuous lesson in endurance, teaching each new generation to survive and uphold the city's strict standards. Life in Sparta was harsh because it demanded constant readiness, self-control, obedience, and physical resilience. Hunger, fatigue, and fear were not anomalies but central to daily experience. Weakness was punished, comfort was denied, and individual desires were subordinate to the collective good. Every activity, from training to dining to household management, reinforced these lessons. Yet through this unyielding discipline, Sparta produced a society capable of surviving centuries of warfare, maintaining social cohesion, and producing citizens of unparalleled endurance. Life was relentless, difficult, and unrelenting, but it forged a culture defined by strength, unity, and survival. The sun set over Sparta, casting long shadows over the barracks, streets, and fields. Boys rested briefly, girls tended small tasks, men performed light drills or planning, and helots finished their labor. Even in darkness, the discipline of the city persisted. Every heartbeat, every breath, every small movement was shaped by endurance, obedience, and preparation for the demands of the next day. The harsh reality of Spartan life was inescapable, total, and unrelenting. But it was this very harshness that made Sparta enduring, formidable, and unforgettable. Sparta awoke again in the dim light of dawn. The barracks echoed with quiet movement as boys in the agoge stirred on hard straw mats. Their day began with the simple, relentless truth of Spartan life: comfort was forbidden, and endurance was demanded. They rose, sometimes shivering from the cold, pulling on thin tunics or nothing at all, their bare feet touching the chill stone floors. Sleep was short and light. The city required alertness at all hours. The first hours were always physical. Long runs over hills, rocks, and uneven fields tested balance, stamina, and mental resilience. Boys stumbled, fell, and rose again, learning that hesitation or weakness could not be tolerated. Wrestling and sparring followed, often continuing until exhaustion, sometimes under the watchful eye of older adolescents or instructors who corrected mistakes swiftly and without mercy. Pain, hunger, and fatigue were constants, tools for shaping bodies and minds into instruments capable of surviving battle and life in Sparta's unforgiving environment. After running and wrestling, the boys practiced combat in formation. Wooden shields, spears, and swords simulated real warfare, but the pressure was very real. The agoge instilled coordination, obedience, and instinctive action. One slip could endanger a comrade, and failure was met with punishment. Discipline was absolute. Boys were trained to respond without hesitation, to endure fear, and to move as one, understanding that survival depended on the collective rather than the individual. Breakfast was minimal. Barley bread, cheese, and occasionally vegetables provided sustenance. The black broth, a bitter mixture of pig blood, salt, and vinegar, was served to older adolescents and adult soldiers, a deliberate test of tolerance and fortitude. Eating was a functional activity, not a pleasure. Every meal reinforced the lesson that survival depended on self-control and the ability to endure discomfort without complaint. Education in the agoge continued alongside physical training. Boys learned to read and write, primarily for literary and administrative purposes. Philosophy and art were largely absent. Abstract thinking was considered unnecessary or potentially distracting. Social skills, obedience, and vigilance were paramount. Boys were taught that failure, whether through inaction or hesitation, could jeopardize not only themselves but the entire city. Fear and discipline became ingrained, shaping the mind alongside the body. Adolescence brought harsher routines. Longer marches, extended drills, and more complex combat formations were standard. Boys endured hunger, cold, and exhaustion as part of training. Mistakes were punished publicly, reinforcing the connection between individual conduct and group survival. The training forged physical and mental resilience, teaching that fear and fatigue were challenges to be managed rather than reasons to falter. Girls, though not enrolled in the agoge, experienced similarly rigorous demands. They ran, jumped, and wrestled to build strength for childbirth and the management of households. Spartan women were responsible for raising strong children, overseeing estates, and maintaining social stability. Physical fitness and social competence were inseparable. While they enjoyed freedoms not found in other Greek city-states, these freedoms were balanced by constant responsibility. Weakness or negligence could harm the family and, by extension, the city. The social hierarchy magnified the difficulty of life. Spartiates devoted themselves entirely to military service, supported by the labor of helots. The Perioikoi handled trade and craft but lacked political power. Helots, who vastly outnumbered citizens, performed the agricultural and domestic work essential for the city's survival. Fear of revolt was ever present, requiring citizens to remain vigilant. Every interaction, every routine, was shaped by this underlying tension, reinforcing constant awareness, discipline, and readiness. Punishments were severe. Boys who failed in training faced beatings. Adolescents could endure additional drills or public humiliation. Adult soldiers were corrected or disciplined for mistakes. Helots lived under constant threat. Even minor infractions could be met with death. Fear and discipline maintained cohesion, taught obedience, and ensured survival in a society where weakness could have fatal consequences. Adult men trained relentlessly. Even outside of campaigns, daily drills, marches, and weapon exercises were expected. Soldiers endured hunger, fatigue, and harsh weather to maintain readiness. Life revolved around physical and mental preparation, obedience, and communal responsibility. Personal comfort and desire were subordinated to the needs of the city, the demands of survival, and the expectations of the military code. Women managed households and estates, supervising helots, preparing meals, and raising children. Physical fitness, education in household management, and social skill were expected. They contributed to the city's stability by ensuring that children could survive the agoge, and that estates functioned smoothly in men's absence. Spartan women were strong, capable, and responsible, yet every freedom came with the weight of societal expectation. The psychological pressures were constant. From early childhood, boys learned to endure pain, suppress fear, and prioritize duty. Men maintained composure in extreme circumstances. Women managed responsibilities with precision and trained them to meet societal standards. Helots labored under relentless oversight. Every individual was conditioned to withstand fear, hunger, and exhaustion. Emotional expression was restricted, teaching self-control and resilience. Even small aspects of life reinforced endurance. Sleep was short and on hard surfaces. Clothing was minimal, sometimes inadequate. Meals were functional rather than pleasurable. Every moment, labor, training, or domestic management was a lesson in discipline, endurance, and vigilance. Comfort was minimized intentionally, and every day was structured to maintain strength, cohesion, and readiness. Religious and social rituals supported these values. Festivals, dances, and ceremonies were communal, disciplined, and purposeful. Music and performance were practiced moderately, often emphasizing physical skill, cohesion, and obedience. Idleness and indulgence were discouraged. Distraction or luxury was seen as weakening the body, mind, and city. Helots, essential to Spartan society, lived under oppression. They worked fields, tended livestock, and prepared food under constant surveillance. Every household depended on their labor, yet they remained controlled through fear and violence. Rebellions were met with swift, brutal suppression. Helot lives were harsh, shaping the rhythm of Spartan society and reinforcing the constant awareness of vulnerability among Spartiates. Daily life for the city was a continuous cycle of endurance. Boys trained, girls practiced, men drilled, women maintained households, and helots labored under supervision. Hunger, exhaustion, discipline, and fear were constant. Every hour of every life was structured to reinforce the city's values: endurance, strength, obedience, and communal survival. Comfort was rare, discipline was universal. Even night offered little reprieve. Soldiers slept lightly, alert to threats. Women managed households quietly. Helots rested minimally, preparing for the labor to come. Every heartbeat, every breath, every small movement carried the weight of survival, training, and societal expectation. The harsh reality of Sparta extended into every corner of life, shaping people physically, mentally, and socially from birth until death. The outcome of this relentless system was a society of remarkable cohesion, discipline, and endurance. Citizens could survive hunger, fatigue, and fear that would overwhelm others. Women maintained households and ensured continuity. Helots sustained the city despite oppression. Boys and men developed unflinching courage and physical resilience. Every Spartan life was an instrument of survival, honed through decades of deliberate hardship. Life in Sparta was harsh because it demanded constant vigilance, discipline, and endurance. Weakness was punished. Comfort was denied. Fear, hunger, pain, and responsibility were inseparable from daily existence. Every activity, training, labor, domestic management, or religious observance, served the purpose of cultivating strength, resilience, and cohesion. Individual desires were secondary to the needs of the city. Survival depended on the unrelenting cultivation of these qualities. Through this unyielding structure, Sparta produced one of the most formidable and enduring societies in history. Soldiers could endure conditions that would overwhelm most others. Women raised strong, capable children and maintained households with precision. Helots preserved the agricultural and domestic labor essential to the city's functioning. Every citizen, from childhood through old age, experienced life as a continuous test of strength, resilience, and obedience. Even as darkness fell over the city, the rhythm of Spartan life persisted. Barracks, streets, and fields remained defined by the demands of survival. Boys rested lightly, girls finished chores, men prepared for the next day's training, and helots completed their labor. Every heartbeat, every movement, and every thought was framed by endurance, discipline, and duty. Spartan life was harsh, unrelenting, and total. But it was this very harshness that created a society capable of survival, cohesion, and unmatched martial skill. The sun would rise again, and the cycle would repeat. Spartan life demanded everything from everyone. Weakness had no place. Comfort was rare. Endurance, obedience, and vigilance defined every moment. Yet through this rigorous, demanding structure, Sparta became not only a city of warriors, but a culture of extraordinary resilience. Life was hard, life was relentless, and life was total. But it was precisely this harshness that forged the enduring legacy of Sparta. From the moment the first light of dawn touched the stone streets of Sparta, the city moved with a singular purpose. Boys in the agoge stirred on their hard straw mats, rising without hesitation, often shivering in the cold, wearing only thin tunics or nothing at all. Comfort was forbidden. Every day demanded endurance, and every action was a lesson in resilience. The morning began with running over uneven terrain, rocky hills, dusty paths, and sparse fields. Stumbling was met with correction. Wrestling and sparring followed, continuing until exhaustion, teaching strength, agility, and strategy. Pain, hunger, and fatigue were constants, shaping young bodies and minds for the challenges ahead. Survival was never optional, it was drilled into them daily. After physical exercises, combat training information took precedence. Wooden shields, spears, and swords simulated real warfare, and precision was demanded. Every movement mattered. Failure to act correctly could endanger comrades, and mistakes were punished without mercy. Discipline, coordination, and composure under pressure were ingrained through repetition and strict supervision. Meals were simple and austere. Bread, barley, cheese, and occasional vegetables sustained them. Older adolescents and adult soldiers consumed the infamous black broth, a bitter mixture of pig's blood, salt, and vinegar. Eating was a practice in endurance, not pleasure. Each meal reinforced the lessons of self-control and resilience. Education in the agoge was practical. Reading and writing were taught primarily for administration. Philosophy and art were largely absent, as abstract pursuits were seen as distractions. Boys learned discipline, social responsibility, and tactical thinking. Emotional expression was limited, as fear, hesitation, and complaint were considered weaknesses. As adolescence progressed, training became more intense. Longer marches, extended drills, and complex mock battles tested both body and mind. Mistakes were punished, reinforcing the connection between individual performance and collective survival. Boys learned to endure hunger, fatigue, and discomfort as part of daily life. Girls underwent rigorous physical training as well, practicing running, wrestling, and strength building to ensure they could bear and raise strong children while managing households and estates. Spartan women held more autonomy than women in other Greek city-states, but this independence came with constant responsibility and expectation. Weakness or negligence could threaten the family and, by extension, the city. The social structure reinforced Spartan harshness. Spartiates devoted themselves to military service, supported by the labor of helots, while the perioikoi managed trade and craftsmanship with limited political influence. Helots, vastly outnumbering citizens, endured harsh labor and strict supervision, living under the constant threat of punishment. Citizens were trained to maintain vigilance, not only for external threats but also to prevent internal revolt. Punishments were severe. Boys faced beatings for mistakes in training, adolescents endured additional drills or public humiliation, and adult soldiers faced correction for poor performance. Helots were subjected to extreme measures, with even minor infractions risking death. Discipline and fear ensured conformity and reinforced the values of endurance and obedience. Adult men continued rigorous routines throughout life. Daily military drills, marches, and weapon exercises maintained physical fitness and combat readiness. Soldiers endured hunger, fatigue, and exposure to harsh elements. Personal comfort was subordinated to the needs of the city, the demands of military service, and the expectation of unwavering loyalty. Women managed households and estates with precision. They supervised helots, prepared food, and ensured children were raised to meet Spartan standards. Physical fitness, social competence, and resilience were expected. Their role was essential to the survival and continuity of the city. Psychological pressures were omnipresent. Boys learned to suppress fear and endure hardship silently. Men maintained composure under extreme stress. Women managed responsibilities while training children to survive the agoge. Helots labored under relentless oversight. Every individual was conditioned to withstand hunger, exhaustion, fear, and social expectation. Emotional expression was limited, replaced by resilience and control. Even leisure and rituals reinforced discipline. Clothing was minimal, meals were functional, and sleep was often brief and uncomfortable. Festivals, dances, and ceremonies emphasized unity, obedience, and skill. Music and performance were practiced with moderation, and indulgence or idleness was discouraged. Life in Sparta was a continuous cycle of endurance and preparation. Boys trained, girls practiced, men drilled, women managed households, and helots labored under supervision. Hunger, fatigue, fear, and discipline were constants. Every hour reinforced endurance, social cohesion, and readiness. Comfort was rare, resilience was required. From dawn to dusk, the rhythm of life demanded unyielding commitment. Soldiers rested lightly, always alert. Women ensured households and estates ran smoothly. Helots completed labor with vigilance. Every heartbeat, every movement, every breath was shaped by endurance, obedience, and duty. Spartan life was harsh, total, and unrelenting. But it was this very harshness that forged extraordinary resilience and cohesion. Sparta's system produced a society capable of remarkable endurance. Soldiers could survive conditions that would overwhelm others. Women raised strong, capable children and maintained households. Helots sustained the city despite oppression. Boys and men developed courage and physical skill beyond most other cultures. Every individual experienced life as a continuous test of strength, resilience, and societal expectation. In summary, life in Sparta was defined by constant vigilance, discipline, endurance, and communal responsibility. Weakness was punished, comfort was denied, and survival depended on obedience, physical strength, and mental resilience. Every aspect of life, from birth to adulthood, from diet to training, from domestic management to military service, reinforced these values. The harshness of Spartan society produced one of history's most enduring, cohesive, and formidable cultures. Thank you so much for watching and listening. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the harsh realities of Spartan life, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you can follow along for more calm, detailed history stories. Your support helps keep these bedtime historical journeys coming. Until next time, rest well and let history guide your dreams.